So here we are in London with Devin Townsend. Devin, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well, man. Thank you.
Busy man as ever. Good news is, of the many projects I know you've got gestating in your mind, and we'll talk about those, there is a new album coming out on the 29th of March, coming out on the EvyDevy Records, which is your label, in conjunction with InsideOut, the Sony label.
Correct.
So primarily, let's dig in a little bit about the album, Empath.
Sure.
Well,
Will be the best place to start. I've done so many records now, and I think my prime motivation for the constant sort of fluctuations that stylistically I've typically been, I guess, known for, is rooted in my desire to try and become a better version of myself in a way. You know, it's like I'm 46 years old now, and I have kids and life, and the things that worked so well for me when I was 22, you know, most of those things don't work well for me at all. And it's funny as well because the career that I have as a 46-year-old man was decided for me by a 15-year-old kid. So the ramifications of that also require constant analysis. And so every record that goes by, what tends to happen subconsciously, I think more than consciously, is the issues that seem to be presenting themselves in my life, whether or not it's, you know, for example, getting older, or having a kid, or people passing away, or money or lack thereof, tends to consume my creative mind as much as it does my waking mind. So I find that without much input from me at all, my creative drive tends to go to writing about those things. And fortunately, once a period of my life has passed and I've got a record that has, in a sense, summarized it, by just objectively looking at the work, I'm able to almost move away from it. Like, you can sort of say, oh, okay, well, you investigated that, and here's the song about it, and then this is what it makes you feel. And in a sense, it's like some sort of personal, not therapy, but, well, maybe in a sense. And so Empath ultimately is no different, but I think that this one represents a significant change for me, not only because I broke the band up, but also because midlife is a motherfucker, man. You know, like, here we are, it's like careening towards 50, and like all these parts of my life that, you know, parents are getting older, kids turning into a teen. You know, I've been with my wife for 30 years, and what is your identity in absence of your work, and how unhealthy is it ultimately to put your identity in what it is that you do professionally in the first place, yet in absence of that, like, who are you? And so this one, although the process is the same as it has been in the past, is mired with something that I think sort of sideswiped me. I didn't see the extent of this kind of existential BS becoming so prevalent. So as part of this process, I've always tried to learn to meditate, but I had a real problem with it. And so this year I've really tried to learn more about it. And granted, I'm in the most elementary school of elementary schools when it comes to it. But the process of trying to learn it, I think, has allowed me to impose a level of self-analysis on this particular period of my life in a way that has resulted in music that is in many, many different styles. And in the past, I was actively encouraged by the label and people, like, you can't put them all in one place. You know, you have to choose one and then roll with it.
Pick an identity, because you have the strapping young lad identity, which was kind of a side project, but that kind of became this sort of like four-headed beast,
Totally.
which took over from
Totally.
your solo stuff, right?
And then the solo stuff then took over as well. And before you know it, you're representing one side of like a broad scope of emotions and things that you're trying to figure out. And so empath as a term refers to, I guess, you know, mine and many people I know's highly sensitive nature and my apparent inability to tune out stimulus and how whatever comes in goes out. And so all these different styles of music became the identity of empath, and it became about emotions, and it became about trying to connect with my emotions and not just intellectualize them as a defense. And here we are. I've made a really weird record that's going to be very divisive, and it cost me a ton of money.
So is the idea you're empathizing with yourself, your audience, your fellow musicians?
I think you need to start with yourself, and this is the thing that I learned about this project that was unexpected. Because I think there's this, a lot of the sort of typical spiritual rhetoric that you hear is, you have to have compassion for people and be in the now and all this, which is all fine and dandy, but I think what it often leaves out is you can't begin to do that unless you actively try to not loathe yourself. So the process for me really was like, well, I can't do all these wonderful things that they're talking about with being in the moment and having compassion for people if my internal mantra is I'm an idiot. It doesn't line up. So once I started recognizing that, man, I've got a lot of hang-ups about self-care and self-love and forgiveness for myself and all this. The whole process for Empath took this unexpected turn into the dark sides of my fears and psyche and what have you.
Is it fair to say it's a clean slate because the project and the band are no more, and this is you as a solo artist putting together or taking the music you've got in your mind, working with collaborators like Mike, and then coming up with something completely new.
Cleaner. I don't know about clean, but it's cleaner, right? I think it's been a long time since my slate has been clean, but I think maybe in hearing you say that, maybe my goals should ultimately be about trying to get that slate as clean as possible, right? And I got a layer of goo off of it on this one, I can see a reflection now, at least. It's still filthy, but...
So I've been enjoying listening to the album, and there's still the trademark, massive production values and the uncompromising musicality that everyone associates you with, and the eclectic nature is that you start listening to something, you think you know where it's going, and then oops, no, it's not.
Well, this time that, if I may interject, that particular aspect of it was much different in the past, because I think in the past, like with Deconstruction or Ziltoid, I would add curveballs to music because maybe I thought it was clever, or I thought it made it compositionally more interesting for it to take a right turn. But this time my reason for doing that was much different, and it's a funny story because it started because I went on a cruise and I realized that taking my family on vacation is what I'm working for. I didn't realize that. Up to this point, I was like, no, I'm working to work. I'm like, no, you're killing yourself, man. Like, you gotta have a good life, right? So a lot of times when it takes these right turns on this record, it's because all of a sudden I realize compositionally, I'm like, oh, you're going down a rabbit hole. Go to the beach. So Borderlands, for example, it's like, damn, bum, 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 and it's like choirs and air horns, and then all of a sudden it stops and you're on the beach. And that was me basically saying, okay, hold on, put the brakes on. Like, don't, when you recognize that you're getting carried away, stop. So a lot of those kind of speed bumps on this record were intentionally made to be a speed bump.
Yeah, I know. In Borderlands, you have kind of that marching band thing, and,
That's it, yeah.
and then you're back on the beach. And I was going to get back to you talked about working towards the idea of taking your family, going on holiday.
Yeah.
The album starts with Castaway with kind of ripples and the sound of the beach. So you starting with the end in mind?
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty goal-oriented guy. I have realized so many things through this process of this record, and I have in every record, but this one more so than others, and I think that's tied into, to a certain extent the personnel, to a certain extent the process that this one implied on me, and but I used to think I was a really complicated person, and I realized that I have complicated ideas, but I think that's only because I'm high-strung. I don't think it's because I'm a complicated person, and I realize the more I do things, the more I'm trying to simplify my brain. And perhaps because this record is really complicated, perhaps I feel like by purging it, it like puts you in a position where you're more able to just legitimately let it go. Because I really, really, really want to. I've got no desire to be this complicated. It's a pain in the ass in every conceivable way.
Yeah, it's one thing that amused me is the three drummers. I mean, King Crimson are on tour at the moment with three drummers.
Sure.
So, Debbie go, it's a studio project. I know one drummer's not quite enough. So, tell me about the three.
I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently. Shoot. I think it's an oversimplification to say I'm a glutton for punishment. I got no desire to be punished. I hate being punished, But my desire to get it right is based on, and I've said this in a couple of interviews today. Firstly, I don't believe that musicians write music. I feel that we interpret our impressions of something that's beyond us. So any moment that I've had in my life where I've been witness or privy to something beautiful or overwhelming, something that clearly shows me that there is something beyond me, my goal is to articulate that with as much accuracy as I can muster with my own biases and bullshit. So with the three drummers, I didn't want to get one drummer and say, Morgan, you're great at free jazz, but I'm really going to need you to do 280 BPM death metal too. Because it's going to end up stressing him out. It's going to end up adding that element of like anxiety to the session. So I just got the right drummer for the right bits and then just distributed the parts in each song between them. And it was expensive.
And I've been listening to the album through. I mean, they're 9 tracks, and then you have naturally you have a 10th track, which is the 23-minute epic. Of course, it makes perfect sense.
Right on. Because brevity is clearly my strong suit.
But it's a kind of a nicely balanced set. You can dip into the 9 tracks, and then when you've done that, you think,
I'll take a breather.
Take a breather. Then you get into Singularity.
I appreciate you recognizing that, because Borderlands and the end of Borderlands with that ambient piece, and then the Requiem with the choir, its whole purpose for being on that record was just like, okay, so just let's take a breather here. Because I think if we go careening right into Singularity, it's like you verge on being sadistic, and that's not my intention.
Yeah, there's plenty to love on this record. So just pull out a few bits. You've got in the first part of the album, the 9 tracks, you've got Evermore, which is, and one of the characteristics is there's a lot of layered vocals on it, and it was kind of like a sort of like a dark version of the Mamas and the Papas, like the Mamas and the Motherfuckers.
That's great. That'd be a great name for it. Yeah, I like that song. I think that's a really cool song. I think it's structurally really interesting. I think it concludes itself well. I like what it does rhythmically. I like that line in the first verse. I like, more than anything, there's 2 things I like in this song. I like the breakdown where it sounds like a satellite hitting the water, goes underwater, and then surfaces again. I think that turned out really well. But I also like the pre-chorus where it goes down, 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 down. I love that sort of turnaround because, and it's not the turnaround because that's fairly straightforward, but I love the fact that there's 3 elements that keep going ding, 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 and then keep growing. So if you catch on to any of them, it gives you a tether. And that tether, by the time it gets to the chorus, the one hits and you're back on the beat. And I really like that. I thought that was a a musical way of making syncopation like an effective tool, as opposed to like, check it out, the one moves.
Yeah.
You know.
So what else we got? So Genesis, which is the second track after Castaway.
Yeah.
For me, it's kind of like Frank Zappa Goes to Hollywood. It's kind of it's got this widescreen sound. It's like a real acid based prog, but it's just got, and then you've got the chucker rhythms and the chorus and everything.
Yeah, I mean, Genesis is meant to act almost like an overture in a way that it's not a song in as much as it sort of demonstrates what's going to come later on the album. And for better or for worse, that's the first song I'm going to release, so people can hear it. So I think that will do one of several things.
And it's got that anthemic sort of Foo Fighters type of chorus to it as well, which I think people really latch onto.
Yeah, I think it's. I really like that one. It was almost a mission statement for the record. It was a way to say, this is going to be uncompromised in a lot of ways here that may be polarizing for some of the more casual fans. But that, again, I figure, well, why don't we just start with that then? If you're going to do that, you might as well just do it straight away, right? Like. And I even heard like steel drums and seagulls at the end. We're at the beach, brother. Yeah. We got to go to the beach. That's a reoccurring theme throughout the record is we're at the beach. Yeah. And
then taking a left turn, you've got Sprite, which is like it's like Disneyland for the disturbed. You've got this little cute story at the beginning, and then it's Fantasia to 11.
Well, the story in the beginning is when I first released the first Strapping on Lad record. At the very end of it, I had found a cassette tape that my mother had of me speaking when I was 3 years old. And at the very end of the Strapping on Lad record is that speech that is in the beginning of Sprite. But on Empath, it's done by a man who's 90. He's a friend of mine's father, and I was in Bath working, and his father was 90 years old. So I love how that brings that story back to this. And Sprite, as is the rest of the album, it's a very strong anti-suicide message. Like the whole record, even in its complexity and its ugliness in certain parts, it's about recognizing that we're all kind of fighting a battle here, and we kind of have to have a bit of patience for the parts of each other that we don't understand, right?
And there's a familiar name on the album, so Anneke Von Geisbergen, if I pronounce that correctly, is the guest on vocals. Am I right? She's on the track "Hear Me."
She is. She's on "Hear Me." "Here Comes the Sun" at the end of Singularity, and she's also on the bonus track "King."
"Hear Me" is a great epic track. I mean, it's sort of, for me, it's like sort of ABBA soundtrack in your Cecil B. DeMille film. So it's like MeshuggAbbah.
Yeah, MeshuggAbbah. That's great. That sounds like a sneeze. You think is untight after it.
Yeah, I love that one. And why the track after that? It's got a show tune vibe, because you did a real Broadway type of album previously.
Yeah, and I'm going to do another one. I think why is really important to me on this record, because when I was playing that track to a bunch of people who were involved with it, like, you don't put that song on the record. I'm like, yeah, but it's a huge part of what I do. Like, I want to have that kind of, hey. I mean, I grew up with that sort of show tunes thing, and I'm good at it. So the idea was, "Hear Me" was in a sense a throwback to Strapping a Lad in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's, 7 minutes of 30-second note kick drums, right? And like screaming vocals and an intense sort of sentiment. And I think "Hear Me" as a song is meant to almost, what is saying "Hear Me" is the part of my personality that I think is still a damaged kid, like the 15-year-old that is still angry and still, really hurt. So "Hear Me" is supposed to put a voice to that part of the my nature, I guess. And then "Why" is meant to follow it up directly with birds and all this sort of thing as a way of saying, that's okay, man, you're good. It's like, why are you asking why? Like, why are you so hung up on all this existential stuff, right? Like, You know, just because you did acid 20 years ago, man, get over it. You know.
And at the end, there's a redemptive close. As you mentioned it briefly. Here comes the sun. So
Yeah.
is that a pathway, the end pathway to
Yeah.
a better and more sort of
Well, I mean,
better way of being?
in a very brief description of the intention of the record, it's about making something that is real. It's about making something that represents life in less rose-colored glasses way than I've done in the past few years. That includes more brutality and more seriousness and more complexity and claustrophobic work. So Here Comes the Sun at the end is a way of summarizing the record, saying, yeah, it's all that, you know, and I don't know, I've got no answers. I'm fucked. I'm more fucked now than I was in the beginning of the day, right? But as are we all. So the whole idea of Here Comes the Sun is, we got to kind of stick together with this depression thing. It's like, if you hang in there, I will. And so I think that's a good way to end the sentiment to this album, right?
And I can say, I've listened to it, that you don't feel fucked at the end. You actually do. It's.
Oh, I feel fucked.
We know you might, but
Yeah.
for us listening to it,
glad.
it's a fulfilling, really fulfilling.
That's so
listen.
good to hear. Because when
Yeah.
I finished listening to it the first time, I was like, holy shit, dude. Like, you kidding me? We're going to put this out? Are you crazy? So I appreciate that. That's really nice to hear. But I think that, it's empathy and, consciously stepping away from our own hang-ups and biases in order to sort of take a deep breath and maybe listen to, I don't know, maybe your wife or your husband or whoever it is, and just be like, look, I don't understand, but now I see it from your point of view. I understand why it's important to you, and I think that's a worthy thing to sing about. It's certainly a lot more worthy to sing about than tits and beer, right? Although both of those things are all right.
So we're looking forward
Breasts.
to plenty of songs about tits and beer when you
I
come
can't
back.
because
You come back on tour.
the word tits is so gross. It's like, it's like, man, I have a hard time. I mean, being a guy is hard too. Like, specifically if you're not gay and you're sexually driven, yet I hate misogyny, and I've been married for so long that a tits and beer record would be so weird for me, man. I think I could turn off women really easily. Like, I'm good at that.
Well, I just remember Rambling Man. There was that giant inflatable penis that was getting passed around,
Yeah.
and the people have the fake boobs. I mean, you can't. It's like you can't pick your family, and you can't pick your audience.
You
right?
can pick your nose though.
You can pick your nose.
My wife came out on tour and saw me interact with women, and she was like, "Oh, okay, we're good. You can go on tour for as long as you want. You're fine."
So yeah, let's just finish briefly on reminding people where you're going to be in terms of touring. You've got a couple of dates in India in March before you come over to Europe.
Yeah.
So it's kind of curious. And then you,
I've always wanted to go, and there's shows there that will pay for my ticket.
there you go.
Sounds great, man.
Nice work, and they have some good beaches as well.
And food.
And food.
Yeah, we're going for Indian tonight.
And we'll see you in March. I think there's 6 UK dates of the during the European leg, and you're playing quite close by the Bush Hall, 24th and 25th.
Yeah.
As I was going to ask, how are those shows going to differ from the ones later in the year? Because you're back playing the Roundhouse, I think, in December in London.
What I decided that because the process of making Empath was so multifaceted and there were so many musicians, I would say there's probably 80 people involved with this record. And because I'm a perfectionist, I'm always wanting it to sound perfect live. But it's a fool's game. And in the past, what I tried to do to make the record sound good live is I put so much on tape, like backing tracks and choirs and orchestras. And by the end of it, I felt like, man, this is not actually playing music. This is like karaoke in a certain way. Even though we were playing, I think the thing that really makes live performances valuable is the connection that you have with the audience and the audience's connection with you. And I think that stripping it back to acoustic, which I've been doing lately, allows me to recognize that, it's the same thing without all this stuff. It's still me. But if I'm going to eventually pull off Empath in its entirety, which is in the works, I've got to start from the beginning again. I've got to do it just with me. And then maybe I can add drummers, bass player, and then maybe by the time we get to Royal Albert again or something, we'll have 80 people on stage, and who knows, right? But stripping it back is important for me right now.
So for people who've seen the tour dates, we want to encourage people to come in March to see kind of the simplified acoustic version, and then by the time you get to the end of the year, the show would have grown.
It'll all be different. I think I got bored of live performances, and I wanted to do something that was... I really want to connect with people with the acoustic thing, and I want to show you that with an acoustic guitar you can represent everything. You can represent the brutal stuff, you can represent the beautiful stuff. It's the intention there. And then in November, I'm going to try a different thing that I've done before. As opposed to trying to make it exactly like the record, I'm going to take all these records, like upwards of 25, 27 records, get a group of brilliant session musicians, and then we're going to interpret those songs, and hopefully they're different every night. And that's what I'll do for that tour. And then will we be able to move that into next year? Possibly. But I like the idea that every experience now is going to be, it's going to have its own identity.
Devin, it's fantastic. It's always fascinating to talk to you. So remind people that the album Empath is out on the 29th of March 2019, coming out on your label, EvyDevy Records, through the InsideOut label. So we're really looking forward to that coming out and having people listen to the whole thing.
Thank you for the support, and thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
You too, brother.